biggest challenge in terms of what we see is that today, if there are, how is it that we can get into more green manufacturing and look at possibly sustainability as a very strong area in terms of how we kind of move forward in terms of the overall area of manufacturing. I think overall the industry is focusing with respect to looking at more and more power regeneration, recycling of water, and looking at consuming less and less hazardous raw materials which go into paint to that extent, so that we can look at promising more and more cleaner, greener kind of manufacturing which is there. With the kind of measures which are happening on the climate change and other areas across the world, one of the big focus obviously is to kind of look at carbon reduction in a very big way in terms of what we can do. So I think that is another initiative in terms of what as an industry we are taking and kind of educating our vendors, because it's not only what we look at carbon emission at our end, it is the full cycle right from the cradle to the grave as we kind of talk of in terms of looking at going ahead. The other challenge which is very strongly there is that how do we look at possibly more greener and more sustainable packaging as we kind of go ahead, because currently the way we handle our water-based and solvent-based materials, there are only limited choices in terms of as an industry we take to that extent, and that is another foray which I think the industry is working in terms of how we can look at far more better reconsumable packing materials which can kind of go, so that we really respect the environment we are and how we can go forward to that extent. So I think that's the collective kind of conscious of the industry which is working, and as leaders I think a lot of people who are represented on these the stage today, I think we are all together taking this lead in terms of saying how we can make it more greener and sustainable as we kind of go ahead.
5 years, 10 years, I think the paint industry has made quite a good progress. As you were saying that, when we look at the sustainability, it starts with the energy, that how do you reduce the energy or how do you convert it to a green energy. The paint majors have taken a good steps in last 5-6 years, and I think at least the top 4 or 5 players, if you really look at it today, this renewable energy is about 40%, 50% approximately. The other part is it's climate, where people have started looking at that how do we start following or looking at the TCFD framework, which is not mandatory in India, but looking at the climatically the things which is happening. So that's another step which paint industry is looking at. In terms of resources, that how do we become water positive, because water is becoming a scarcity, and if you look at the different part of the world, I think this is very clear that in the future it can be a problem. So how the industry, the manufacturing can look at reducing the consumption or becoming water positive, that's another area which the industry is working. The waste generation which happens from the manufacturing process, how that we can make it zero, or how do we recycle it, that's another area which the industry is working upon. So I think these are some of the steps which maybe it started little late, but I think last 5 years the industry is really picking up, and I'm very optimistic that going forward the paint industry, the paint manufacturers are really looking at all ways and means to see that how do we make it more and more sustainable.
Multinationals, lot of Indian entrepreneurs kind of coming on the anvil. We have seen multinationals earlier like Jotun, Nippon, Sherwin-Williams, all have kind of entered. We've also got Benjamin Moore, who's entered in a small way to that extent. So I think over the last 2 decades, we've seen a plethora of MNCs coming into that extent, along with a lot of Indian entrepreneurs which are now stepping into the zone because I think from a point of view of infrastructure construction, it is a natural extension which kind of comes in because you are catering to the overall construction piece in a big way to that extent. The other area which we have seen is that given the whole potential, you just saw that the overall paint consumption which is in India is only at a certain level. This is literally 1/10 the size in terms of what we see in the Western geography. So overall, as we see all together, is that the paint potential in terms of where we can go as per capita GDP consumption kind of goes, and the per capita paint consumption can go, I think it is definitely much stronger, and that is something which the growth prospects is something which is really kind of getting people into that extent. And lastly, the track record, if you see, of the paint industry, the general CAGR at which the paint industry has been growing. You saw a figure of 62,000 crores, and when we kind of project this to the next 4 or 5 years, this would easily kind of go to about more than 1 lakh crores in terms of the overall size of the industry in terms of going forward. Given the fact that there is a high inflation and decent profitability in the overall business and a natural extension in the growing infrastructure in India, the way India is going overall to that extent, it becomes a really good attraction in terms of people to kind of come into this industry and start looking at paint very differently.
Which is 100-year-old and growing at the rate of double digit. So last 20 years, 30 years, continuously the growth is happening in the paint industry. So therefore it is supposed to be a high growth industry. The per capita consumption is just 0.5% of the per capita income, if you really look at the paint. And as Amit was saying, if you compare with the other countries, even the country like Thailand, Indonesia, the consumption is 7 kg, 8 kgs, while in India it is about 3 to 4 kgs. So I think, and you must have seen that last 1 week, the news about China, that India is becoming, the most populous country. So I think the way the government is also looking at many initiatives, the way the India story is emerging, where that everybody is confident about that there is going to be economic performance, there is also going to be a social performance of the country, which means the standard of living will improve, and paint play a very important role in terms of improving the standard of living. So I think there is a confidence in the air that the paint industry, and also the penetration of the paint still is about 55%. So if you compare with some of the developed nation where the penetration is 80-90%, it is 55%. So there is a opportunity in terms of the penetration continue to go up. There is an opportunity in terms of that India is a populous, and therefore that more and more consumption happen. There is an opportunity in terms of that repainting cycle keep reducing, and therefore the consumption of the paint will keep increasing. And also I think in this industry for last so many years, the players have maintained quite a good discipline and equilibrium in terms of maintaining high growth and decent profitability. So I think that is becoming the point of attraction for the other players, that if the industry is going to go at this particular rate, they can be a part of this growth story.
Just to add one more point, that if you look at it from a global industry perspective, the global paint industry is valued at around $175 billion, and India is just $8 billion. But if you look at the growth rates which are there in India vis-a-vis the other countries, India is growing at a double digit, while most of the developed world is growing in single low digits. So if you project this in the next 20-25 years, you will find India's share in the total global paint market will significantly go up, and that's possibly the opportunity that a lot of global MNCs are seeing, and what is attracting them to this country.
I can just add. Hello.
Thanks.
Hello.
Hello. So I can just add one small point. India today is one of the fastest growing economies in the world, compared to all the other nations in the world. So there is that much room for growth. One of the other big factors is the relatively younger population. If you look at the way the different countries are, there are a lot of senior people in many other countries. In India, there are a lot of young people, and that leads to a more aspirational expectation out of life. People want a better life, a good life. Everybody wants to be living better. So I think this is one of the biggest factors which also, and paint being a product which is associated with, like a dream house or a dream car, and, having, everybody wants to have a very nice house, Paint is associated with that. That is one of the reasons which impacts the good growth and good attraction for the paint industry.
Industry today is poised to kind of literally grow at almost growths of anywhere between 10 to 12% every year to that extent. And if you extrapolate the figure, as I said, that for the next 5 years, you would easily kind of cross 1 lakh crore from a point of view of the paint industry. And therefore, what we see is that these growth rates should kind of continue. As Anuj was also indicating, it's a consumption economy. And what we must understand is that paint is a very big consumable in terms of looking at not only the aspects of decorating and beauty, but also from a point of view of protection in a very, very strong way. As we see today, the Indian industry from a protection point of view is extremely underdeveloped to that extent. You see the thousands of assets worth crores in terms of decaying to that extent. And today what we see is that one of the big areas which can take off with government's help is in terms of how do we kind of look at supporting the government with respect to the huge assets which can come in terms of where all paint companies can contribute from a point of view offering good products which are there, which could kind of really protect our assets as we kind of go forth to the extent. So one big area which we see is that the entire government sector, and along with that the whole institutional segment, I think is a very big piece, because with so much of industry coming in India, what we are attracting towards from the world, we have now the multinationals like Apple and all who are setting up shop in India. And India manufacturing is now becoming the next big story, given the fact that in China we are seeing all sorts of restrictions and problems in terms of what are kind of coming into that extent. Therefore, one of the big areas, according to me, which will develop, apart from the whole area of home and housing, which is inflationary anyway from the point of view of what the projection of the government is, I think this whole area of government and the B2B kind of business in terms of taking up shape in a very, very strong manner in terms of how we want to kind of go ahead. The whole initiative of the infrastructure, I think that's a very, very big area. The number of airports, the kind of roads, the connectivity in terms of what we are talking, I think we are going through really transformational times, literally. And true to the spirit of Nutation, it's something which is changing at such a rapid pace that we think that the government projections in terms of the 5 trillion, in terms of what they are talking of, I think is a clear reality if we have the right government perspective, initiative, and the entire support from the central government in this vision in terms of what they can take up. And I can only tell you that paint industry would be only 2 steps ahead of that economy in terms of going ahead as we kind of look at future.
Also, sir, can you talk about international competitions?
That currently, as far as the Chinese competition, as far as the paint industry is concerned, we don't have largely any Chinese competition which kind of comes in from the point of view of finished paint, which is there to that extent, because I think Indian manufacturing is cost competitive enough in terms of taking care of our own way in terms of how we can compete from the most economical segment to the most, I think, luxury segment, given the kind of innovation, given the kind of technology all the paint companies today are possessing and taking it. When we look at China, China is a very big source in terms of the raw materials which kind of come into our country, and therefore I think the biggest area in terms of where China basically becomes a key kind of service provider to us and a key vendor is the whole area that they are big suppliers of key raw materials, even something like a titanium dioxide. And when you look at even in case of certain monomers, certain additives, a lot of additives which kind of come in, there are a lot of big sources in China in terms of the overall support what we get. So I think China's existence from a point of view of cheaper availability of raw materials, I think, is an essential thing in terms of what we are still kind of dependent on in a very big way. As far as multinationals, other than this thing is concerned, today I think Indian players are calling shots by being amongst the top 15 players in the global rankings to that extent, and therefore what we see that there is nothing that possibly multinationals are ahead from a point of view of either technology or in terms of from the point of view of manufacturing prowess or in terms of marketing capability or in terms of technology, IT or otherwise. I think the Indian companies are doing a fantastic job in terms of looking at how we are able to cater to our overall economies to that extent, and therefore I don't think so that we have any kind of apprehension from any of the multinationals kind of coming. I think they come and they possibly find to either live in coexistence with us, but I don't think so that there are any things which today paint companies in India lack. I think we are all very cutting edge in terms of the way we are able to kind of look at our businesses, look at consumer, look at our manufacturing processes, and look at in terms of taking a new path for the future.
The one indirect competition, China in the past attracted a lot of investment, say for automobile manufacturing. And today, if you look at the policies like China Plus One, Europe Plus One, because this advantage was available with China because of the cheaper availability of the raw material or the cost of the labor was lower. But I think with these policies, because a lot of players and the countries are looking at de-risking, so I think the India stand advantage, and therefore China had the advantage of having better export, say for automobiles, and probably in the coming future because of these China Plus One policies, maybe more manufacturing, the more production will happen in India, and therefore in Indian, say automobile market, which export about 15%, there's a possibility that this export can go from 15 to 25%. So from that point of view, the indirect competition from China, I think with these kind of things which are emerging, the India will be having a favorable, emerging trend.
Can I just add a couple of points? So 2-3 changes have happened in the last 3-4 years. Especially it has got accelerated in the time of COVID. So today a lot of industries are seeking supply reliability, which earlier was not an issue because global trade moved pretty freely. But COVID brought a lot of challenges to the Indian industry. So today it is acting as an impetus along with the government push for Make in India to actually ask MNCs to start setting up units within the country, and we're seeing a lot of renewed interest in that area, which will ensure a lot of supply reliability to the country. Second thing is the Indian industry, the paint industry itself is has grown to a particular mass in terms of size, and that's going to attract a lot of investment. And third, I think the demanding consumer is asking for a lot of international technology, what they see in maybe social media and stuff like that, which is also attracting a lot of players to the country to actually set up base and advanced R&D setups, which will actually act as an impetus to the paint industry.
From Nutation, he represents the idea of Nutation. And Jashin, you want to say?
Yes, of course. It's a fish, so that brings the flavor of Goa right by the sea. But more so, with him, we'll swim along with him in the waves of change.
So the idea is the waves of change. Nuti swimming with the waves of change.